inflation on that. But the public at large has not, and this is where we come to the political will that Dr. Eminger quite properly talked about. Everybody talks against inflation, but what he means is that he wants the prices of the things he sells to go up and the prices of the things he buys to go down. But sooner or later, we come to the point where it will be politically profitable to end inflation. This is the point that I think you were making. Where do you think what do you think the rate of inflation has to be, and judged by the experience of other countries, before we will be in that position, and when do you think that'll happen?
Well, the evidence says it's got to be over 20%. Now, you would think we could learn from others rather than have to repeat mistakes.
Apparently, nobody can learn from history.
But at the present time, we're going toward higher, not lower inflation.
You said earlier, if you want to see who causes the inflation, look in the mirror.
Right.
Now, for everybody watching and taking part in this, there must be some moral to that. What has to be the change of attitude of the man in the mirror you're looking at before we can effectively implement what you call a tough policy that takes courage?
I think that the man in the mirror has to come to recognize that inflation is the most destructive disease known to modern societies. There is nothing which will destroy a society so thoroughly and so fully as letting inflation run riot. He must come to recognize that he doesn't have any good choices, that there are no easy answers, and once you get in this situation where the economy is sick of this insidious disease, there's going to be no miracle drug which will enable him to be well tomorrow. That the only choices he has, do I go through a tough period for 4 or 5 years of relatively high unemployment, relatively low growth, or do I try to push it off by taking some more of the hair of the dog that bit me and get around it now at the cost of still higher unemployment, as Clarence Brown said later on. The only choice this country faces is whether we have temporary unemployment for a short period as a side effect of curing inflation, or whether we go into a period of still higher unemployment later on and have it to do all over again. That's the only choice we face. And when the public at large recognizes that, they will then elect people to Congress, a president to office, who is committed to less government spending and to less government printing of money. And until that happens, we will not cure inflation.
So, Dr. Friedman, let me differ with you to this extent. I think it is important that at the time you are trying to get inflation out of the economy, that you also give the man in the street, the common man, the opportunity to have a little bit more of his own resources to spend. And if you can reduce his taxes at that time and then reduce government in that process, you give him his money to spend rather than having him yield up all that money to government. If you cut his taxes in a way to encourage it to putting that money into savings, you can encourage the additional savings in a private sense to finance the debt that you have to carry, and you can also encourage the stimulation of growth in the society, that is the investment into capital improvements, modernization of plant, make the U.S. more competitive with other countries, and we can try to do it without as much painful unemployment as we can get by with. Don't you think that has some merit?
I am all in favor, as you know, of cutting government spending. I am all in favor of getting rid of the counterproductive government regulation that reduces productivity and disrupts investment.
And if we do that, we can cut taxes some, can we not?
We should. Taxes, but you are introducing a confusion that has confused the American people. And that is a confusion between spending and taxes. The real tax on the American people is not what you label taxes. It's total spending. If Congress spends $50 billion more than it takes in, if government spends $50 billion, who do you suppose pays that $50 billion?
Of course.
The Arab sheiks aren't paying it. Santa Claus isn't paying it. The Tooth Fairy isn't paying it. You and I, as taxpayers, are paying it indirectly through hidden taxation. And therefore, the crucial thing is to cut down total government spending from the point of view of inflation. From the point of view of productivity, some of the other measures you were talking about are far more important.
But if you concede that inflation and taxes are both part and parcel of the same thing, and if you cut spending...
They're not part and parcel of the same thing.
If you cut spending, but you take the money from them in one way or another, the average citizen,
Absolutely.
to finance the growth of government. So if you
Absolutely.
cut back the size of government, you can cut both their inflation and their taxes.
That's right.
If you,
I am all in favor of that.
all right.
All I am
one
saying
other
is
way
don't kid yourself into thinking that there is some painless way to do it. There just is not.
One other way is productivity. If you can increase production, then the impact of inflation is less because you have more goods chasing.
Absolutely, but you have to have a sense of proportion. From the point of view of the real income of the American people, nothing is more important than increasing productivity. But from the point of view of inflation, it's a bit actor. It would be a miracle if we could raise our productivity from 3 to 5% a year. That would reduce inflation by 2%.
What happened overnight? That it's part of the long range squeezing out.
There is only one way to ease in my opinion, there's only one way to ease the pains of curing inflation. And that way is not available. That way is to make it credible to the American people that you are really going to follow the policy you say you're going to follow. Unfortunately, I don't see any way we can do that.
That's exactly, Professor Friedman, that's exactly the point which I wanted to illustrate by our own experience. We also had to squeeze out inflation, and there was a painful time of 1.5 years. But after that, we had a continuous lowering of the inflation rate with a slow upward movement in the economy since 1975. Year by year, inflation went down, and we had a moderate growth rate which has led us now to full employment. So you can shorten this period by just this credibility. And by a consensus you must have also with the trade unions, with the whole population, that they acknowledge that policy and also play their part in it. Then the pains will be much less.
You see, in our case, expectations are that inflation is going to get worse because it always has. This means we must disappoint in a very painful way those expectations, and it's likely to take longer, at least the first time around. Now, our real problem has not been that we haven't tried. We have tried and brought inflation down. Our real problem was we didn't stick to it.
That's it.
Then you have it all to do over.
I would concede that psychology plays a great, perhaps even the major part. But I do believe that if you have private savings stimulated by your tax system, rather than discouraged by your tax system, you can finance some of that public debt by private savings rather than by inflation. And the result will be to ease to some degree the pain of that heavy unemployment that you seem to suggest is the only way to deal with the problem.
The talk is fine, but the problem is it is used to evade the key issue. How do you make it credible to the public that you are really going to stick to a policy? 4 times we've tried it, and 4 times we've stopped before we run the course.
There we leave the matter for tonight, and next week's concluding program in this series is not to be missed. From the Harper Library, goodbye.
Next week, find out how power is used and abused. Learn how concentrations of power affect the lives of every American. Don't miss Free to Choose next week.
$11% of the